Hello and welcome back to Veritas Live. You're on episode 7. I'm your host, Anthony Cusimano, and super excited to get into today's topics all about cybersecurity. And it's worth mentioning that October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. This is an initiative where governments and industry try to get together to ensure that every American has the resources they need to be safe and secure online, while also increasing their resiliency against cyber threats. And we have an amazing panel of guests with us today. They're going to help share their perspectives and insights into everything that's going on with cybersecurity. And they're going to be playing right into our theme of the year, which is Do Your Part, #BeCyberSmart. This highlights our role in how to be proactive and take steps to enhance cybersecurity in the workplace. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty on everything cybersecurity, I want to get to know our guests a little bit better because they are amazing. So let's go ahead and get started with today's icebreaker. Joseph, I want to start with you. What was the biggest wow moment you've had so far in regards to cybersecurity or threats?
Well, I've had a few, but I think anytime cybersecurity crosses over into the physical world, that's my real wow moment. I think battling Stuxnet back, and I remember the date, it was July 10th, 2010, at the organization where I was CISO for a while. Stuxnet had entered our environment through a USB storage and had started attacking our file servers, looking for Siemens centrifuge equipment. But we didn't know that at the time. And I think the real wow moment was when we were we were able to isolate it. And I had some folks on my staff start to reverse engineer the code and look at the code. And they were very surprised in the sense that they had never seen anything like it before. It had no comments, etc. So that was a real wow moment in terms of understanding how a cybersecurity event can affect a physical environment and potentially cause harm to a human.
It's amazing. I feel like I just got a mini movie in the description of that story. Karen, what about you? What was the biggest wow moment in your career so far?
I agree with Joseph. There's a lot of wow moments if you work in this industry, but my first one was in 1996 at the Department of Justice. And Attorney Janet Reno said that she wanted to send an email out to all 170,000 employees. And I was in a meeting and I asked, hey, what happens if somebody answers back? That delayed the project for a couple months because all the lawyers had to jump in on that. And in the meantime, what happened was we were the first federal government website ever to be hacked. And so we had the head of our attorney general on the naked body of Jennifer Aniston, and my boss kept saying to take the website offline, and then the technical team said they did, and that's how we learned about caching and how the whole internet worked and why we couldn't get rid of that particular website and all of the redundancies of why the internet does what it does. So it was a very eye-opening experience for a lot of reasons.
I feel like that's the moment we realize the internet is written in ink. What a story. Payman, what about you? What was the biggest wow moment in your career so far?
So I think I go back to early 2000. It was in one of the companies, mid-sized company that we were bringing up, came from background infrastructure. So literally within 2 hours of bringing up some of the external facing websites and services, we were under full-on attack. It took 2 hours. And I had to basically delay the whole go live, take it down, and that was my first experience. Eye-opening.
All three of these stories are giving me minor anxiety, and I feel like this episode's only going to do more as we go in. So let's dig into sort of the subject at hand. We're talking about cybersecurity as part of just sort of laying the groundwork here. I have a stat I want to share with y'all. So we were doing some tracking, and in June of 2020, we found that there was a ransomware attack that was happening every 11 seconds. Now, as time has progressed in June of 2021, we found that number has skyrocketed. It's 30 attacks a second now, which is just a buck wild increase in number. So I'm going to ask each of y'all the question, how did we get here? So Karen, let's start with you. How do you think we got here with such a large number of attacks happening every single second?
Well, first, I think it has to do a lot with we like our technology, and the United States is a very innovative country as well. So technology is pervasive. Everything we use, we call it the Internet of Things, but everything we use, everything that we do, we are very technology-oriented society. And so what happens with that is a lot of the unintended consequences, because people invent technology to do good things, to solve life problems, to help with really analyzing things in our cars, to make it more efficient. Our TVs are smart TVs, just all kinds of things, right? And then along with that comes the unintended consequences. And that's the other side who figures out, oh, well, I can go in and do this and I can do that. And these are the other things, as we're interconnected, that we don't realize that we're actually opening up new threat vectors that really attack the individual, company, and our nation as a whole.
As technology improves, so do the attacks. Joseph, what do you think? How do we get here?
Yeah, it was a long struggle for years, trying to convince senior leaders to take cybersecurity seriously, internal networks wide open, et cetera. And, the main theme for many, many years was don't get in our way. You're a necessary annoyance. We need to move faster. We need to fail fast, and we need to, growth, quarter after quarter growth. And we see cybersecurity as a necessary annoyance. It's something that gets in the way. And then when you're working somewhere that's not a bank or not the government, they'll use that as an excuse to not fund cybersecurity. And I think it's not all negative now, but I think now the chickens are coming home to roost. Is that we put a chip in everything, and we've got software in everything, right down to a toothbrush. And now our attack surface is tremendous because we haven't been taking it seriously for many, many years.
Now, Payman, I know you deal with this on a day-to-day basis. What's your thought on how we got here?
It used to be much simpler. It was, protect the boundaries of single entity. Data has been all over the place now. We have data in multi-cloud, but at the same time, what happened over the last year is we end up, and because of COVID, lots of people end up working from home. And each one of those working from home opened up a new attack vector, as well as lots of the companies end up having to change where and how they provided data to their employee because they were not in the company anymore. So that ended up causing a lot of fast, the knee-jerk reaction to accommodate the business, end up opening up more attack vector.
Okay, so I'm getting we have more security, more technology. It's everywhere. It's in the toothbrushes. Is this it? Is this the sort of the pinnacle of how bad things are going to get, or should we expect things to get worse? Karen, I'm curious to hear what you think.
Well, so I think we're at an inflection point, but throughout my career, I'm always thinking we're at an inflection point, right? But I do think that society as a whole has seen some of the consequences associated with not paying attention. So, for example, if you take the idea of multi-factor authentication, I know myself, based on all the jobs that I've been in and the policy positions and everything else, I have been preaching multi-factor authentication for, I know, at least 15 years. But yet, when we saw the ransomware issue and when that's with Colonial Pipeline, and then that CEO testified, what happened was that was not a multi-factor authentication solution. It was a single password. Although I guess I should feel better when he testified that he said it was a complicated password. But it obviously wasn't complicated enough because they got in. So, yeah. But the American people saw the consequences from that, right? Like there were backed up lines at gas stations, the whole supply chain, like the whole idea of supply chain, those of us who have also been working this, looking at it very holistically, the whole idea of supply chain, where things are manufactured, how you put vulnerabilities directly into things, people are living it, to Payman's point about COVID. So the whole idea of supply chain risk management has really come to the forefront as well. And all of it is intertwined, because what it really comes down to, what Joseph said, which is risk posture, right? Do I forego certain risks because I want short-term gains, or do I actually invest into the future so that I can have long-term profits? And that is a balancing act that all companies, small companies, mid-sized companies, large companies, and governments really have to wrestle with now.
That's a great point, Karen. And I'm curious, Joseph, as far as risk posturing goes, do you envision this getting better, or are we on a downslope for worse things to come?
You know, for folks who know me, they know I'm pretty optimistic, and I'm not a big fan of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which we call the FUD factor, or at least we used to back at IBM, but in the day. But my feeling is there's going to come a day when, you know, major infrastructure is starting to be affected by this. You know, Aloft Heavy Industries, which is a gray hat hacking consortium back in '98. Testified in front of Congress at the invitation of Fred Thompson and started to talk about, and you can find the video up on YouTube, and started to talk about potential attacks on critical infrastructure. And, you know, we were ringing the bell back then, but, you know, I'm not so sure everybody was listening. We really need to just be ready. And unfortunately, you know, Karen was talking about risk. I think a lot of it comes down to, you know, the short-term gains, but the risk transference. And where do we transfer that risk? You know, ultimately, I don't think we're thinking it through. The risk gets transferred to the consumer. The risk gets transferred to the patient, to the driver of a vehicle, to the pilot of an airplane. When we start to put computers in all of these things that keep us alive, that's where the risk goes. And we have to consider that.
It's a very scary and legitimately good point. Thanks, Joseph. Now, lastly, Payman, curious to hear what you think. Are we on a upslope or downslope as far as this whole thing is concerned?
I think we're gonna be, you know, I don't see the end anytime soon. I think, you know, it's gonna keep on evolving as we get better, and we get better at protecting and identifying and tracking the attacks. I think at the same time, at the same rate, and hopefully not faster, the attackers are becoming more intelligent and finding new ways. So it is a balancing act, and I think we're going to be at this for a while. It's a cat and mouse.
Well, from a technology perspective, we have our battle cut out for us. So let's change gears a little bit and talk from a policy perspective. Joseph, I'm curious to hear from you, from policy, platform organization, what is the sort of importance to drive better cyber acumen?
Oh, God, that's great. I'm not a big fan of blame the victim, right? We always talk about, you know, security awareness. It's Security Awareness Month. You know, you've got really sophisticated phishing attacks that sometimes are missed by artificial intelligence, which, you know, compared to human intelligence is supposed to be a lot better. And so you're never going to get 100% of the population not to click on something. So I think ultimately, and then even if we start to close that gap, you know, the attackers, the bad actors, especially when they're state sponsored, they're going to take a different direction. You look at the Nobelium attacks now and how they affect, you know, tokens and sessions in the browser, et cetera. So they kind of get around multi-factor authentication. And I'm not suggesting that multi-factor authentication is not a useful thing. It's incredibly useful. We should continue to strive to have everyone using multi-factor authentication. But the attackers are very, very smart and agile and flexible, and they're not under the same constraints that the defenders are under, right? We have to follow the rules. We have to follow policy. And the attackers have none of those constraints. So we have to start to think about attackers, get individuals thinking about ways in which they can be taken advantage of. And I think that will make them educated consumers, if you will.
Excellent point. And Karen, I know you have a deep history in policy generation. What's your thought on the state of things and where they should be?
Well, you know, yeah, a deep history in policy. I have to say that you're seeing this evolution happen right now because Congress really wants to feel like they're doing something, right? That they're helping their constituents. And so one of the big examples that you're seeing is notification. So when a breach happens, Congress is passing legislation that is saying, hey, you have to notify within 24 hours, or you have to notify within, they're arguing over whether it's 24 hours or 72 hours. That, you know, that's really great. But I think we should really be taking a look at, like, you have to know you've been breached. And when you start looking at a lot of the statistics, many times the adversaries are in your systems for months before you even know that you've been breached. So, when, you know, there's several questions that you've asked, and I think a lot of this has to do with really taking the noise out of the system. So that's to Joseph's point. Like, you really want to have multi-factor authentication so that you're dealing with a smaller population versus people who can fly under the radar and say it's not me. Right now, because there's so much noise in the system, it's really hard to have attribution, you know, whether it's nation states, whether it's criminal elements, or whether it's just advocates doing certain things. Attribution is really hard because of the way things are constructed. And so I think what it'll come down to is companies are going to have to practice what we call due diligence. And I'm going to say due diligence is another area that has been debated, I would say, for at least another 20, you know, past 20 years, about what constitutes due diligence, that a company has done that, so that if they're a publicly traded company, they can show their stockholders that we've actually practiced due diligence, but this was above and beyond because it was a sophisticated or nation state actor.
You know, Karen, I love that you brought up the nation state side of things, because we actually have a question from our audience. Luis asks, is this all about political dominance? Why does Russia and China have an army of hackers deliberately attacking sites? You have any idea on that one?
Oh, I think we all have ideas on that. And I think Joseph actually hit on that, right? Is, you know, and so I'm all for norms, and I'm all for cyber acumen and same things that everybody else says, right? But when we go to the UN as a nation, we're trying to negotiate out what are cyber norms, right? So we're going to follow cyber norms. But when we start looking at other nation states, are they really going to follow cyber norms? And so, you know, you really have to get the noise out of the system, and you have to know offense, because if you don't know offense, then you're not going to be able to plan a good defense. And so there is, I mean, this gets into, oh, are we going to have a cyber Pearl Harbor and all these other things like that? You know, there's a lot of us who have theories of how this is going to work, but there is a lot of reconnaissance that can be done by going into different infrastructures, right? Critical infrastructure, see how we're going to respond. I mean, you saw how the nation responded just based on the ransomware with Colonial Pipeline.
Absolutely. Yep. It's critical, and timing is of the essence when it comes to responses. We had one other question in payment. I think you might be able to help us this one. It comes from Dan, and he asks if there's one piece of advice you could give a company on how to prepare for ransomware or cyber attacks, what would it be?
That's a hard one, actually. But as Karen said, you know, the due diligence, I think that's going to be key. Knowing your environment, you know, no infrastructure, no environment is perfect. That's one aspect of it, and having the due diligence and do a continuous improvement. The other aspect of it, again, is, as you brought it up as in the start of the show, is that, you know, the culture. Everybody should be aware. And one of the, you know, lots of us in the security, we used to do, you know, once a year we do our audits, or do testing, but that's no longer enough. We are changing at a fast pace, and our security practices has to be part of our day-to-day activity and part of the culture. So those are the things that I think, you know, one, get it to a safe, you know, to a stable place, but then you have to keep it there. And that's where I think it's important. And of course, the rest, you know, the back end of it is, if you know, most security, we think it will happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So if you prep for that, then you need to prep, you know, your your back end. How are you going to deal with it? Are you, are you doing the, truly annual review of all your recovery and being able to recover in that scale, being able to do those activities? That's how we're going to be able to at least have a chance and be prepped for it.
Absolutely. We've said many times on this show, it's not a matter of if, but when. So we feel that and we agree. All right, last question. And this one's incredibly relevant because the SolarWinds case is happening right now, as are more SolarWinds attacks, apparently. I saw even this morning, they're finding it's just the hackers are still at large and making attacks everywhere. What are some of the legal implications of this level of cyber threat and security, and how is it going to shape sort of the regulatory policy that happens in the future? Karen, curious to hear what you think on this.
Well, as the former DHS CIO, I had the opportunity to be able to respond to a SolarWinds attack because DHS was one of the 9 federal agencies. A lot of this gets back to also what Payman was talking about is like you have incident response plans. The time when an incident is actually happening is not the time to test to make sure that you know everything that you're supposed to do. Like that should be the first thing that you become familiar with. But what's coming out of that, I think, again, is a lot of what I would call due diligence, a lot of things that are related back to just good practices. And, when you really, it took, what the adversaries did was exploit a trusted relationship. And one of the things in that particular case, and this again gets back to supply chain, is we are always pushed to automatic patch updating, right? And it makes sense, that's a good practice. And so that was what ended up being exploited. Now, do I think that you can test all the patches before they go in and rebuild code and redo things? Probably not, but you're going to have to really evaluate what are your high value assets and then take a look at what they're calling the software build of materials, which means you're really going to, and that is being regulated, and you're really going to have to look at who all is involved, how did they use this code, how is it, what is the pedigree of the code, and then be able to evaluate that so that you can go back and say, okay, this group can be automated, this one I'm going to have to do a little bit more due diligence on. It's really making us rethink a lot of those trusted relationships that we relied on in the past. In order to raise the bar, we have to go back and revisit. That's going to be tough. That is really going to be tough, and that is looking to be regulated. And just some of the basic things, we were talking about this before we got on air, about understanding underlying technologies and how they come to be. That is going to become really important too. Just basic software development, how things were done, how you do configuration management in libraries and recompile code and match things up. I mean, I am surprised when I'm on some of these calls to hear some of the business practices that especially like in SolarWinds case, that they're putting in place, because when you grow up in this field, you think, oh, people continue to do that. But because technology has made it so easy, it's not being done anymore. And that's what's being exploited.
Incredibly insightful. And as have all 3 of you been for this entire episode, I thank you for your insights, your opinions, and your perspectives on these matters, because like you've all said, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And as a business, as individuals, we have to think about this very seriously and critically, especially moving forward into the future. So I want to thank all 3 of our panelists today for joining us. Again, it is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so do your part, #BeCyberSmart, and be sure to join us on the next episode of Veritas Live, where we will continue to talk about the trending topics happening in the industry today. Look forward to seeing you there. Have a great one.